Welcome back to another week of Kernel at the Buzzer. We want to remind you that all the opinions of everyone on this podcast are the opinion of the speaker and the speaker alone and do not reflect the opinion of the entire Kernel. I'm your host, Colton Johnson, and this week we're going to talk about Kentucky football as they fell to the Vanderbilt Commodores by a score of 20-13 at home. We're going to talk about all the things good and bad that happened at Kroger Field coming up next. Welcome back to another week of Kernel at the Buzzer. I have two guests this week. Please introduce yourselves.
I'm Kyle McClelland, head of women's basketball. Excited to be on another podcast and talk about this Vandy game.
And I'm Sara Gibson, and I'm a football beat writer.
So I'm not really going to mince words about it. It was one of the most painful football games I've ever watched in my lifetime. Sara, you were there up in the press box. You heard the groans. What'd you see?
I saw another lackluster offensive performance from the Kentucky Wildcats. Going into the game, my talking point was, can the Kentucky offense score enough to keep up with Vanderbilt? And the answer was shockingly, no. Shockingly. What am I talking about? It was not shocking. That's pretty anticipated, actually, with this Kentucky team this year. Once again, the Mark Stoops and Brad White defense putting up a pretty good performance. I mean, holding the Vanderbilt Commodores offense to 20 points when they're coming in confident as ever after that Alabama win, I was impressed by. And it's just sad that the offense could not keep up to outscore that. I mean, 13 points is just not enough to win football games in the SEC.
Kai, a bit of a different medium for you. You also got to be in the building to watch the game, but what did you see?
Well, being in the crowd, hearing the reaction from fans firsthand was pretty funny, I'd say, at least. I was disappointed in Kentucky. This was very similar to that South Carolina game where it's like, this is a game you see on the schedule, an unranked SEC opponent, and you're like, you need to win this one. It just needs to be an automatic win. And if it's not, then those ranked opponents become even scarier. I think this was just an unprepared team. You have 2 weeks to prepare for Vandy. They just didn't. I don't know what went wrong, but they were not prepared at all. They got out-coached and everything.
Kentucky's never really been that good off a bye, but some numbers for you. Brock Vandegrift was 15 for 25 through the air for 143 yards, and that sole touchdown to one Dane Key. 37 yards on the ground. Dane Key had those 83 yards as well as the score. Demi got in the end zone once. Demarion Wilcox, 3 rushes for 35 yards. You got to love it when a backup running back averages 11 yards and just doesn't see more snaps. You got to love it. For Vanderbilt, Diego Pavia, 15 for 18, 143 yards, 2 touchdowns, and the first interception for the Commodores this season, as well as the 53 rushing yards that we prioritized last week. We knew that was going to be a focal point of his game, something he wants to get out of the pocket, he wants to extend plays. And I don't know about y'all, but it just seemed like Kentucky knew that was going to happen, and yet they couldn't stop it.
Yeah, you have a team that's 37 rushes for 145 yards as a team. That's just something you got a game plan for.
Yep. Well, in the same sense, because it's not like Vanderbilt has a stellar running back. I mean, Cedric Alexander's their leading rusher. 11 rushes for 53 yards. I mean, if you look at that at the end of the day, it's pretty effective. But, Sara, this front seven was prioritized on Pavia, were they not?
They were, and actually it was not the front seven from the defense that I was the most impressed with on the evening. It was more like the linebackers and the safeties are kind of what held the defense together in this game, in my opinion. Because I was expecting Deion Walker to have a big game coming into this. I mean, there were a lot of eyes on him and the rest of this defensive line. And while they held up in the pass game and were able to get some pressures on Pavia, clearly they were not prepared for him in the run game.
No, and that's the confusing part to me. But in the same sense, you talk about the way you think the game is going to go. And sometimes you prepare for it, and sometimes, you're not prepared for it. But I know one thing Kentucky fans were not prepared for was Wilson Berry being unable to put the football on the ground. So in that sense, what was it like not watching Alex Rayner kick a field goal for the first time this year?
That was honestly surprising. In the press box after the first little snaffle on a kick with the Wilson Berry interception, obviously that's jaw-dropping. It catches everybody's attention. But then when it happens again later in the game, obviously it wasn't for the interception, but it led to Alex Rayner not kicking a field goal. It's like, okay, we're shooting ourselves in the foot here. Kentucky is just absolutely not only losing to Vandy by Vandy being the better football team, but losing to Vandy because Kentucky was just not disciplined in this game. Between stuff like that, mental errors like that, and the penalties that were absolutely crazy against Vandy, Kentucky had stood no chance.
Yeah. Now tell me it wouldn't have been cool if Wilson-Berry completed that pass.
It would have been cool. I mean, sure, but as a fan of the game, I've been watching from since I've been alive, I'm thinking, okay, they got a penalty. They were on the half-yard line. Now they're at the 10. Take your points. It's a slow game. Yeah. And then everyone's like, what just happened? Like, are we serious? Like, they just picked off the – I don't know, man. I don't think it was a good decision.
Just throw a fading ball across the field. Don't know who – I think there was only Commodores over there, but I digress. Now, looking at other things that unexpected in a sense that happened, Sarah, I know we've always talked about how one-dimensional it is when Gavin Wimsatt comes into the game. Change that up a little bit. What'd you see?
So on the very first drive of the game, they bring Gavin Wimsatt in, and literally the writer sitting next to me says, oh, well, here comes a run. And I 100% agreed. And to our dismay, we watched Gavin Wimsatt drop back and launch about a 50 to 60-yard ball to Barryon Brown, which he did not catch because there was a pass interference, so the offense got to move up 15 yards. Not a spot penalty in college, sadly, for the Wildcats on that. But it was just immediately jaw-dropping, and it was something that I wanted to see Bush Hampton call for this offense, and something that I hope that we continue to see more, because as long as Kentucky can implement things like that and then not have a holding call on the next play that kind of stalls you out, then maybe we can build some momentum on offense.
Now, the one that's been sitting in the back of my mind, because I mean, you both were there. You saw what the stadium looked like. It was popping. I mean, it was a live environment, and it's like that storybook SEC environment that you talk about. And Mark Stoops, over the past 12, 13 years, has done an amazing job in creating that environment.
For sure. But
as of recent, I don't know about y'all, but I just don't know if he's done as good of a job in deserving it.
Yeah. What was the stat you mentioned of against SEC opponents in his past?
In the last 12 SEC home games for the Wildcats, they are 2-10.
Yeah, and 2-3 at home just in general against all opponents this year. And I think those are the games you have to take advantage of. You're at home, you have everyone on your side. You're in a loud environment. You know, Vandy just beat number 1 Alabama, but it's at the point where you feel like Kentucky's favored because they got that home crowd. They got the reckless fans. That's just something that you have to take advantage of. You can't lose easy games at home.
Yeah.
And speaking on that environment, coming into the game, a lot of the reporters in the press box were talking about how the fans were, or not all fans, but some fans were complaining online about Kentucky announcing the blackout just a few days before. So we were not expecting the turnout for the blackout to be what it was. It truly was shocking how many fans, obviously the student section we knew would show out, but how much the rest of the stadium played into the blackout, it was amazing. And the fact that Kentucky went out there and was unable to pull off a win against Vandy, who used to be a just given win at home, is crazy. And then really quickly, back to your 2-10 SEC home stat, I was just looking at some of the losses. Not a lot of them are close losses. A lot of them are 2-score losses. 2-score loss to Missouri, 2-score loss to Tennessee, 2-score loss to Bama. It's not even putting on a good show for the fans. It's getting blown out in front of the fans at home.
Those are some tough matchups, though. Tennessee, Bama, back when they weren't losing to Vanderbilt, The
good days.
But the issue that I have overall, and I know it's kind of been a repetitive beating of one horse, but it's kind of Vandy pulled out all their stops against Alabama. I think, you look at it from a broad perspective. You have the number 1 team in the country at the time coming in. It's at home. If you're going to win anywhere, it's there. You throw everything you have. You open the book and you just let it all happen. So there's not anything in the sense that was a mystery about this Vandy team for Kentucky. They got to see everything yet. It was like Swiss cheese for a little bit.
Yeah, you have the film. You have 2 weeks to prepare for this Vandy team. And like you said, I mean, they pulled out all the stops against Alabama. So it's like what they're going to do in their most desperate situations. You have Vandy's number, and if it's 3rd and long, or if it's 3rd and short, or if they're on the goal line, or if they're facing something in the back of their end zone, what they're going to run. So the fact that you're unprepared coming off that bye week, it just speaks numbers to the coaching. It speaks numbers to the players, how bad they really want it. Vanderbilt just wanted it more.
Yeah. Now, I think the most troubling thing about this game in general, that was a good one.
I don't know what that was. That was like a – I don't know what that was.
But I think the most troubling thing about this Vandy game is more so the games that precede it. Because like last week we talked about how this 3-game stretch was like in terms of bowl eligibility, because that's kind of the bar now for Kentucky football, is like making a bowl game. And if you don't win that bowl game, it's a failed season at this point. And obviously expectations are only going to go up, but I feel like the output's going down as of now, obviously. And looking at this 3-game stretch, that was Vandy, Florida, Auburn. My take was you needed all 3 of those because you need 6-7 wins to get bowl eligibility.
6 wins.
6 wins for bowl eligibility.
Yeah.
And, God forbid, if this team goes down and loses in Gainesville to a very underperforming Florida team, you kind of really wonder if that's even going to be possible.
Yeah, like you're looking at the rest of the schedule too, like going beyond, Vandy, Florida, Auburn. You really have one guaranteed win, and that's Murray State. You have games at Tennessee and Texas. You have a rival Louisville team. It's like every single week now is like win or you're not doing anything the rest of the year.
Yeah. Last point that I want to have on this Vandy game, just looking at the first couple series. So obviously, you have the Kentucky punt. Vandy goes down like it's breaking sticks, and you just kind of have this, here we go. This is how this game is going to go. But then Kentucky comes back around, and they lead a nice drive down the field. Demi finds the end zone, and you're back into it. They follow it with picking off Pavia for the first time, and then they fumble the football back. So it seems like, in a sense, this team is so partial in knowing when to do things correctly. And I feel like those lapses are just really amplified with this team.
Yeah, you mentioned like picking off Vandy. Very next possession, when all the momentum's in your favor, it's a tie ball game. You can go down there and score. The crowd's on your side. Then Dane Key fumbles.
Dane Key fumbles the football.
And then Vandy, in a minute before the half, goes straight downfield and scores. You lose all your momentum, and you're going into the halftime where you're like, okay, what do we do now? Like, we have no answers.
Yeah.
And it's not even like that fumble was the only major momentum killer of the game. The Wildcats had a touchdown called back on a holding penalty. Like, you just can't have constant mistakes like that, like a fumble and a holding penalty calling back a massive touchdown. It's just things like that add up over time, and you stand no chance of winning a football game like that.
Now, once again, the beautiful thing about all this is we get answers to our questions, and we got the answer on Vanderbilt. They're the better team, and it really I don't know why. Halfway through the second quarter, it felt over to me. Like, no matter what could be mounted in the second half, it felt over to me. But I feel like Florida is we're talking about 2 different spectrums. We're talking about a Vandy team that's overperforming and a Florida team that's drastically underperforming that just lost Graham Mertz.
Yeah, Graham Mertz is out for the season now, so they have kind of a situation there where Vandergriff can go out there and be the best quarterback on the field. I know that's a hard thing to say, but it's like, yeah. And then you have to take in, it's at Florida, probably the loudest stadium in college football.
Yeah.
And
when they're good.
Kentucky's mindset right now as a 3-3 team probably isn't the most, a crowd doesn't bother me. That crowd's definitely going to get to them.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, even with saying that comment about Vandergriff, I think it's going to be a bit of the same from Kentucky.
Yeah.
That's so funny that you say that, because I literally had this pulled up right before we started the podcast, because I wanted to make the argument that even with Graham Mertz out, I don't think that Brock Vandegrift is the best quarterback on the field. I think DJ Lagway is a perfectly fine quarterback, and he stepped in there when Graham Mertz went down and still gave the Volunteers a chance to win. Not the Volunteers, the Gators a chance to win against the Volunteers. And, for a Florida team that has been underperforming, they just went into Tennessee and competed. Still competed after their quarterback one went down. And have a little bit of confidence now with Kentucky coming into town, and they're going to have a hometown crowd. It's going to be nighttime. We're going to hear Tom Petty coming into the third quarter, and it's going to be a little bit intimidating for the Wildcats, I think.
And the thing about Legway, too, that you can also point out, he's like Pavia. Like, he can throw, but he has that triple option ability.
Yeah.
If Kentucky's not able to guard it at home, I can imagine with a Florida crowd on their side that they're going to be able to do anything against another option quarterback.
Lagway isn't even the starter, and he already has half as many completions as Vandergrift has this season. It's just stuff like that makes me not believe in the Kentucky offense or Brock Vandergrift at all.
No, I mean, I think the Ole Miss was the only Ole Miss game was the only grace that he had, in the sense of, like, you know, it was a great performance, and it wasn't only the throws he was making, it was the decisions he was making, because Stoops and him, they talked about how Berrien wasn't the first option on that go route, and they talked about how Dane wasn't the first option on that touchdown, which is probably a lie. I feel like Dane is the first option on most plays.
But
it feels like it.
But like, in the same sense, how you talk about how Lagway has half the completions, there were points in the season where Vandergrift was almost behind two quarterbacks on the same team in almost all quarterback stats. Now, granted, it was Arch Manning and Quinn Ewers, but it feels like every single week with this guy, the narrative's just getting worse and worse now.
Yeah, it's coming back like even heavier now because you had 2 good weeks from him. Ohio, Ole Miss, over 200 yards passing in both games, good QBR, throwing good balls like from the other side of the field to the right half. So it's like he looked impressive. It kind of looked like we could be like, you know, okay, he did his job against Georgia, good game against Ohio, good game against Ole Miss. Now what? Are we going to keep that momentum going? And it just completely crashed and burned against Vanderbilt. And, you know, it's unfortunate, but it's the truth. If you can't compete against these SEC teams, you know, especially at home, you're not going to do anything beyond that.
I think the SEC team's comment was right there. I think Brock Vandegrift is a good quarterback. Like, he has proven that he can compete. He has fire in him. It's just when you look at him, he's small. He doesn't make the best decisions compared to all these SEC quarterbacks. He just doesn't belong in the SEC, in my opinion. But I think he would be a perfectly good quarterback out, like, in the Big Ten.
Yeah, he'd thrive at, like, NC State, you know, something like that.
Go back where Devin Leary came from.
You know, it's just – like, it's tough because, like, you hear the guy talk and you watch him play, and there's no lack of effort with the dude, and that's never been the question. I just genuinely think it's and, like, you know, that's got to be a tough thing for him to hear from a lot of constituents and fans and stuff, but I genuinely think it's an execution issue. I just think there are points where the lights get too bright and the play gets too big, and at the time he's just not capable of doing things.
Yeah, and I even wrote this down. Like, at this point of the season, you shouldn't be making those mistakes. Like,
No.
You shouldn't have this many penalties. You shouldn't be making the wrong reads. I know that Stoops in the presser after the game was, like, comparing this a lot to the South Carolina loss, but it's, like, nowhere close because you have Vandergrift who threw for 30 yards against South Carolina, and now he's at the point where he's at least throwing for 150. But, like, I don't know. It's still bad as bad. You know what I'm saying?
I think just the program in general has kind of been spoiled since Will Levis left. Now, obviously, Devin Leary comes in and he's not what was promised. Now somehow ends up I don't think he's on the Ravens roster anymore, but
I have no idea.
He might be on the practice squad.
Maybe. Well, that's a quick Google search. But even with Leary and how much he underperformed, I thought there was a little bit of grace with Kentucky fans this year, but it was just in the sense of, like, no, this guy's been on an SEC roster. He's seen some snaps. He was a 5-star out of high school. And then he comes in, and it's like the days of old. It's like Devin Leary again. It's like Devin Leary that can run a little better. That's all. From a superficial standpoint, that's all it seems like it is to me.
And I think Stoops mentioning that he needs to find who the leaders are for this team. Your quarterback is like the known leader of your football team. Will Levis was the team captain of this Kentucky football team. Like you mentioned, they've been hurting, you know, since Levis left. And, you know, I completely agree. Vandergrift should be the guy going out there leading this team, leading this offense every single week.
Yeah.
If you were to ask me, I would say the leaders of this team are all on defense. I just don't think that the Kentucky offense has that guy to turn to when things are spiraling. I don't think they have anybody that can lift them up like the defense does. Yeah. Like Derek Jackson, Max Harrison, Deion Walker, like those are all staples of the team that guys turn to and look to when they need need somebody to rely on, and the offense is looking around like.
No. I mean, I think it's definitely it sucks, but I think it's like you said. I think it's a given that even on the offense, I'd say that Dan Key is probably the leader on the offense. Eli Cox is probably the leader on the offense.
Yeah.
Like it's not, and like you said, it should be the quarterback on any given football team. You have a guy that controls the flow of play. It should be the quarterback. Now, taking it back to Florida because I feel like it's not a trap game per se because no one team is either like higher than the other, but I just don't see Kentucky winning this game.
I don't know. I'm just going to leave it at that. It could go Kentucky's way, could go Florida's way. I think it's a game it's going to be a hard watch. Like 7:45, it's going to be about halftime. You're going to start dozing off a little bit. I think the pace is going to be slow. I think Florida's probably going to pull off a big chunk play. I think Kentucky will too.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to try and predict a score because I just don't know at this rate.
I think that it'll be a dogfight. I think it'll definitely be a close one, in my opinion. To be honest, after seeing how Kentucky rebounded after South Carolina, I know how much Pop Dumas-Johnson was saying how he doesn't like the feeling of losing and he doesn't want to just rinse and repeat the same process and have a big loss followed by a big win. But to me, I feel like that's just the story of Kentucky football, and that's how the season's going to go. So I feel like Kentucky probably does scrape up this win, but probably come home and lose the next week against Auburn.
What, like final score, like 18-12 or something like that? There's not going to be that many touchdowns in this one.
I was thinking more like the 21 to like 18, 17 range,
For me, I want to see. Now, this is not me saying that I want the defense to underperform, but I want like a switch of narrative. I want a switch of flow of game. I want to see a game. That's because I feel like that's what needs to happen. I feel like Brock needs to come out and be the reason that Kentucky wins a game.
Yeah, like she said, like the backbone is the defense. Like you're playing Kentucky, they have a good defense. Past 4 weeks, 13 points, 6 points, 17 points, and 20 points.
Yeah.
They're not giving up 30, 40 a game on a consistent basis like we see with Alabama against Vanderbilt last week. The defense is doing their job, frankly. The only thing you could get on to them about with the Vanderbilt game is a third down conversion, but they're on the field, 30 minutes of the game. I agree. We need to see a change in narrative. We need to see Brock have that 300-yard game. I know it's probably not the most likely, but I agree. We need to see something like that.
I also want to see a Jamarian Wilcox dominant performance. I want to see him get more snaps, man.
He gets 10 yards every time he touches the ball.
He really
does.
The fact that Mark Stoops punished him so hard for not tying his shoes, and he needs to learn how to tie his shoes. Mark Stoops, I respect you. You coach a pretty good football team most years. You have a good defense. NFL players have shoes fall off all the time, and you do not see them sitting on the bench for most of the game because of it. Like, I thought that was such an overreaction, and when you're in a fight like that with Vandy and you need everything you can get on offense, I think it's absolutely ridiculous to punish a guy like that.
And especially coming off the Ole Miss win when he was the one who broke that near 20-yard run and got the Kentucky offense like finally in a gear where they're like, okay, we can do this. We can beat Ole Miss. So like to not a guy that's averaging 6 yards a carry and then giving him 3 carries and then saying he needs to tie his shoes though, it's just like it's a bad conflict. I don't understand it.
Now, it's kind of eerie that every single issue that we talk about with this team, it all kind of ties back to the coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we talk about Wilcox being used more. We talk about – now, we're not going to get on Bush Hamdan. I feel – this is going to be really rude. I feel like his performance in games does enough to the point where we do not need to talk about how poor he is at his job.
Okay.
I feel like that's a different script with Mark Stoops. I feel like this is a guy that's been leading this program, has brought them to what they wanted to be back when it was 2014. But they expect results from this guy. And I think week in, week out, we're kind of not getting them.
Yeah. The point I put down, Kentucky should be 5-1 or they should be 4-2 right now. And ultimately that comes down to coaching. He's complaining in the pressers about assignments not being met and making the wrong reads, and the players are hinting that the players are underperforming and it's not entirely his fault. And I get the point that you can only blame a coach so much, but you look at the record, you're a 3-3 coach. You lost gimme games. You made a, controversial call against the number one team at home, costing that loss too. It's at the point where every single week he's in the hot seat, and we got to hold him accountable. But then on the flip side, if he gets another ranked win, I feel like we'll be praising him the week after, and then it's a big puzzle with Mark Stoops.
It is all one big cycle with Mark Stoops, I think. I just think I agree with Kai. Like, most of the losses that this Kentucky football team has, I think can be boiled down to coaching errors. And when you look back at, I can vividly remember last season after the EKU game in the presser, him saying that they have to cut back on the penalties and how bad the penalties were. And here I am a year later sitting in the presser after the Vandy game hearing, we have to cut back on penalties. We're not disciplined. We're undisciplined. This is a reoccurring problem through multiple years. And it's not just the penalties and stuff. It's the creating the home environment and not showing up for the fans. It's coming so close against these big teams and trying to compete and then just falling just short in the end. It does make me think that his tenure in Lexington is coming close to its end.
I think at the least. So I know you said it was going to be difficult to come up with a number. I need some final scores. What do we think is happening in Gainesville?
You said 18-12. That sounds pretty good to me. I'll agree on that.
18-12?
Yeah.
I'll put a little more points on the board. I'll go 21-17.
I think, golly, dude, the level of disrespect coming from me is crazy.
Do you have 18-12 Kentucky or 18-12 Florida?
Florida.
I'm
Yeah,
21-17 Kentucky, just because I think they're going to continue this cycle of big win, big loss, big win, big loss.
21-17 Kentucky. So you're saying they get 3 touchdowns?
I bet most of them come on the ground.
Okay. Yeah, I'd agree. Well, like I said, the beautiful thing is we always get answers. It's really nice. And we got finishing thoughts.
Who's scoring? Like, if you think all 3 are on the ground. Like,
Not
is
all
Vandergrift
3.
pulling the Joe Burrow and going all the way down for a 70-yarder? That'd be crazy, dude.
I would not say all 3 are coming through the ground. Maybe Dane Key or Barryon catches a touchdown, and I can see Demi with 2, or maybe Brock with 1 on the ground and Demi with 1 on the ground.
I'd like to see Jamarion get one.
I would love to see Jamarion get one,
He
but
deserves it.
with the way this season's going for him, I don't know if we'll get to see that.
Well, like you said, you're going to be there.
Yes,
So.
I'm looking forward to it. Long trip, but it'll be good.
It'll be good. The Cats take on the Gators this weekend in Gainesville, Florida, and our very own Sara Gibson and Jonathan Bruner will be there to cover all of that for you. But until then, thank you, and we'll see you next week. We want to thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Kernel at the Buzzer. We'll be back with plenty more next week after the Cats take on the Florida Gators. But until then, I want to encourage you to head on over to KYKernel.com or KYKernel Sports on Twitter or X for all of your UK athletics coverage. And until then, I'm Colton Johnson. We'll see you next time.